Hello everybody. So in this video, I'm going to be discussing project assignment number 1, which is on choosing a data set. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. So as you can see on Blackboard, you have a template that you're going to be using to um, complete your project. And then there's a list of possible data sets that you can choose from, and a sample assignment, and a rubric that you can look at if you would like. So I'm just going to go off my sample. My sample is just going to be filled in. The template's just the blank version you're going to be using. And then I'm also going to be talking about this possible data set list. So let me go ahead and open that up, and then I will share my screen again. All right. So this is going to so this beginning part here is just going to discuss kind of what's required of you in this project. So this first project is all about choosing the data set you want to use for the rest of the class. So the idea is choose something that you're interested in, on a topic that you're interested in learning more about. And I'll talk more about the list with all the data sets in a minute. Um, and then there's just the objectives. Um, and basically, you're going to choose a data set, complete the questions, submit to Blackboard. And then this is the grading scale. So on the first attempt, if you get it all correct, you're going to get 100%. If you need revisions, you're going to get 50% until you make the revisions. And then your second attempt, which is your final attempt, if you get everything correct, you get 100%. If you meet most of the expectations, so pretty much most of it's correct, more than 50% basically, you'll get 7 points. And then if you meet less than 50%, you'll get 5 points. And of course, if you don't submit anything, you get a 0. Um, I would also point out that the rubric shows the exact criteria for each grading level, but as long as you make the corrections on your first attempt, there's no reason you shouldn't be getting 100% of your second attempt. You have 10 days, I'm sorry, not 10 days, 7 days after you get my feedback on your first attempt to resubmit and resubmit your second attempt. Make the changes and resubmit. Obviously, the sooner the better, so you can move on to the next project. And I'll give you feedback on the second project if second attempt if there's still more corrections to make before you use it in the final project. So there's 7 individual assignments and then the final report, which kind of puts it all together. All right, so this is kind of the template for the first assignment. So you're going to choose a data set and then you're going to answer the questions. So I'm going to go to the possible data sets list. So this is a list of possible data sets that you could use for this project. So skim through this list, pick a couple that you think you might like, and then you can explore them on our Guru. So I'm going to talk about how our Guru works with this in a second, but it has the repository and the data set name, and then it also gives you like a brief description here of what it is so you know what you're looking at. There's a lot of different options here. Please pick something you're interested in. You're going to be doing this for the rest of the semester, so make it interesting for yourself. So I'm going to go to our Guru now and kind of show you how that works. So if you go under data, and then you go under data import and data set repository. So this is where all the data sets are. So up here is the repository. So you can type up top here like the repository the data set's in, like it was ecdat. Then you could type that in and you would select it. But my data set that I did for my sample was in car. So I'm just going to type car and select it. And then down here you can type the data set name. So salaries is the one that I did in my sample. And then there's a couple things you can do here. So if you import it, that's going to put it over here so that you can open it and you can see the different variables. And then this I button here, that gives you information about the data set. So it gives me up top a brief description of what the data set is, and it also defines what the various variables are. So this is obviously going to be very useful when you're defining your variables so that you know what you're looking at. So this page is very useful, and it's going to be very useful when you're answering questions about the data set. And I'll refer back to this as I'm answering the questions, but I'm going to close this and I'm going to open the data set. So if you see a variable like this, like an X variable, which is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., that's probably an identifier variable. So it's just like data value 1, data value 2, data value 3. So that's not a variable that you would want to use. It's just a label variable, basically. And if you have any questions on if you're in your data set, like whether it's a variable or not, because sometimes you might have like names in here too, like a name of a college, for example. If your data set was about various colleges, that wouldn't be a variable you would want to use. That's also just like a label or identifier. So make sure the variables that you end up using in the project and focusing on are actual variables that you can use. And of course, you can check that with me if you're unsure. And so all the variable names are up here. If you do want to see the whole name, I believe you can click on the three. Oh, actually, no, never mind. You don't even need to do that. The full name should be over here in this column over here if something's cut off. And I believe you could also like auto size the column. Yeah, so if you want to see the whole name here, you could also right click on these 3 lines and auto size the column, or you could auto size all columns. And so that'll basically expand so you can see the whole thing. So now this is just basically tells you what's in the data set, and that information page that I showed you also kind of tells you what the different variables are. So that's all you really have to know right now. We're going to be doing, of course, a ton of stuff with this throughout the semester. But to start with, that's mainly, what you're going to be looking at for now. So once you choose your data set, then you're going to go back to the project assignment. So you're going to give me your name, the repository name, and the dataset name, which I switched that. So in my sample, I just realized I need to switch that because I have it backwards. The repository should be car here. And then the dataset name should be salaries for professors. So just make sure you have that in the right order. And then you're going to answer the question, is the data set from a population or a sample? Use the definitions learned in class to explain how you know. So probably most of them are going to be samples. So keep in mind that like a population is basically taking everybody out of a particular group, whereas a sample is only taking a proportion out of the particular group. So in this case, it's not every college professor. It's just a group of college professors from one school. So I would consider that to be a sample. And I got that information from the information page. So if I go back to the repository and I click the I, so you can see it kind of defines that it's just from one college. So this is where the general summary of the data is helpful. So let me go back to my thing here. And then is the data set an observational study or an experiment? So once again, the description kind of helps you there. So in this case, this was clearly an observational study for my data set because there was no controlling of any factors or anything. There wasn't, some people assigned to one group, some people assigned to a different group or anything like that. All they did was observe and collect information. That's definitely an observational study. Probably most of them will be. On occasion, you might get an experiment where it has like a control group and then somebody who took a pill or whatever versus like a placebo group, and then they're comparing the two groups. That would be an experiment. But most of the time, it's probably going to be an observational study. If you're just simply observing and collecting data, there was no manipulation involved or controlling of any factors or groups, then that's an observational study. And so this doesn't need to be super detailed up here, just, make it clear that you understand why. And now in this part, so you're going to pick 3 variables from your data set, the 3 that are most interesting to you. and you're going to write each of the names of them as they appear in our guru in here, and then you're going to define what they are in your own words. So the years of service is how long the person has been a professor in years at the school. The salary is the professor's 9 month salary. And the sex is obviously whether the person's male or female. And then you also need to tell me whether it's qualitative or quantitative. So sex is definitely qualitative. It's not numerical data. And the years of service and salary are continuous quantitative because they can take on any value. They're not restricted to like whole numbers or anything like that. Usually time is always going to be continuous because it doesn't necessarily have to just be 5 years. It could be 5.02 years, for example. Um, and then the last question. So actually, before I move on, so kind of where I got the names from on that. So I took the names from up here, from the titles of the columns, and then for the so you can see I didn't just copy like what was on here exactly. I did say it in my own words a little bit. So you can, obviously you don't have to make it that super different, but please don't just like copy what's on here. But this will give you a general idea of what the variables are, and then you can then describe it in your own words. So now the final part. Using your data set and the variables provided, describe how you would take either a stratified sample, a systematic sample, or a cluster sample. So you only have to pick one. So think about how you could use the variables in your given data set to take a new sample. Don't bring in new variables or anything. Just think about how you could take a sample with your given information and variables. So for example, so for a stratified sample, so I know one of my variables was gender or sex. So I would split the college professors into groups by gender, and then take a proportion of simple random sample from each group. That's a stratified sample, split it into groups, and then take a sample from every group. And then for like a cluster sample, what I could do is, so I could split the college professor into groups by salary, also one of my variables in my data set. I'm only grouping things with the information I have. I'm not bringing new variables into this. And then I take a simple random sample of the entire groups and then select every professor in the chosen groups. So in other words, instead of taking a simple random sample from every group for a cluster sample, you take a random sample of the groups and then select everybody in the chosen groups. And then for systematic, that's pretty simple. You could just say something like, I selected every fifth professor in this example. So every fifth, every 10th, whatever you want to make it be. And then that's pretty much it. So then down here is where I will give you feedback. So I'll tell you on the initial grade whether you met all expectations or new revisions, give you some feedback. And also I'll put some feedback in these boxes up here. This is also a feedback column for me. And then there's also a place down here for your grade after the second attempt. And that is pretty much it. So that is project assignment number 1. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.